Hello and welcome to In the Spotlight with Quocirca, the definitive podcast on digital disruption in the print industry. I'm Louella Fernandes, Director of Quocirca, and today I'm joined by Joanne Collins Smee of Xerox. Today we'll be discussing the role of automation in SMBs in terms of their digital transformation. So welcome to the show, Joanne. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Louella. I appreciate you inviting me.
So to start off, I know you've been at Xerox for just over 3 years and you've come from outside the print industry. So could you tell us a bit about your career journey and your role at Xerox today?
Sure. I'll start with my role at Xerox today. I'm the EVP of U.S. small and medium business and channels and the worldwide leader of IT services. Before that, I actually joined IBM right out of my graduate program, and I started as a developer and then moved into sales and service for our clients, and had a wonderful career at IBM and was there over 2 decades. And then I joined the federal government, which was really, really interesting, and ran a large transformational project down in Washington, D.C., and then joined Xerox about 3 years ago. So this role that I'm in now is fabulous. It's focused on small, medium business, which is a very, very large part of Xerox's revenue and profit.
And so having been in the IT industry for quite a long time, are there any key trends that you've seen or changes in the industry over those past years?
Well, the biggest thing, I dealt with this in IBM and all our clients that I serviced and worked with there, as well as in the federal government. And same thing here in Xerox, which is it's not just hardware anymore, right? In fact, hardware is the most uninteresting piece of what we do. It's all about the software and the associated services. So hardware is necessary, but their software and the associated analytics and process reengineering, the services are critically important to be able to support our clients. So I saw that, movement in IBM when I was there. When I first joined IBM, the revenue was all coming from lovely hardware that quickly shifted right into software and services. The federal government, when I worked there, it's so interesting. Again, historically, the spend in the federal government in the U.S. was on things, right? And then it shifted. And when I was there, we were focused on a very large transformation project. All of our brain power and revenue, dollars was shifted to software and services. You still need hardware, but what makes it sing are the software and services around it. So for me, that's a big piece. And the fact that you need the hardware engineers, the software engineers, the service engineers as one team versus in separate towers has been really interesting.
Yeah, and I think, that's what we're seeing, generally in the print industry is this shift from hardware to software to services. And it's really interesting that you've got that background, having seen the similar shift happen, in a company like IBM, but we see that in a lot of hardware-centric companies. In terms of your remit, you mentioned that you're focusing on SMBs and channels, and that's really what we're discussing today, specifically the opportunity for SMBs to automate their operations. So could you give some insight into what you've seen in terms of how the pandemic has impacted the SMB market compared to larger enterprises and how it's had an effect on their digital transformation initiatives?
Sure. The SMB piece of the economy in the U.S. is the backbone of our economy, quite frankly. 99% of the enterprises in the U.S., commercial enterprises, are considered SMB. And in Xerox, we categorize small, medium business as anything between 1 employee and 1,000 employees. So it's a big span of quite small to quite large, and revenues up to $1 billion. So you can see how it's a wide swath. What's not included in SMB and Xerox, and the way I'll talk about our offerings, are what we think about are very large enterprises, right? Those Fortune 100. One of my colleagues here in the US, Mike Feldman, focuses on those. So SMB is a very, very large, important part. We call it the backbone of the economy in the US, small, medium business. Innovation comes from there, right? Apple, IBM, HP, Google, Xerox, they all started as small businesses, right? And are now household names. So small and medium business is a critical part of the economy. And what we found is they were hit extremely hard as a result of the pandemic. Now, it depended on which sector you were in. If you were in retail sector, hospitality, those were hit the hardest. And that's obviously a worldwide statement. And some of the other pieces of the economy, industrial, obviously, healthcare, those were more resilient. And when we look at what our clients needed in terms of the pandemic and what the pandemic has done in terms of the acceleration of digitization, it's been shocking, right? So companies that used to come in and did all their business brick and mortar, all of a sudden were calling us saying, oh my goodness, I can't go into the office. I still need to service my clients. How do we do this? So we had a massive rush on digitization. And Louella, this gets back to something you mentioned at the very beginning. We are not just a hardware company anymore in Xerox. The software and the services are a critical element of the support we provide to our clients. So we found that in SMB, we were very focused immediately on helping our clients get up and operational. And that did not just include print. We went in and helped them analyze their processes to understand how they were going to still be able to meet their clients' demand, what things we could help them actually digitize, how we could help them get those bills, and the revenue that was maybe still coming into the same post box, right? How were we going to help them digitize that whole work stream? The other thing that we found with the pandemic that was a massive driver to help the digitization push go forward, probably a decade, right, in a year, was the fact that employees, right, in the US, we call it the Great Resignation. Employees, we are not able to secure the talent that is needed specifically for roles that are integral to the business. So we have helped, the digitization effort has helped automate pieces of that process so that the SMBs are less reliant on their employees, and the employees that they do have, they can put them on more value-added business. The other kind of the last point I would like to make regarding the pandemic is security and cyber threats, which escalated dramatically. And the largest portion of the enterprises they hit was small and medium business because they had vulnerabilities. There was, not the same attention that a very large enterprise would put on security. So that is another area that in Xerox, we are very focused on helping our clients become more resilient and include the tools necessary to, have a robust cyber position.
I totally agree, because I think, the past year, as you said, has shown that SMBs have proven to be really resilient. And I guess that resilience is really key to the recovery of the economy, because they are, as you say, the backbone to the worldwide economy. And technology and adoption of digital capabilities, I guess, is really critical to their ability to react and thrive in the constantly changing market. So in terms of digitization and automation of manual processes for SMBs, can you share some typical examples of processes that can successfully be automated, and how does that affect their future success and business resilience?
So again, there's some of these that I'm going to talk about, Louella, that we introduced before the pandemic, and some that actually is part of the pandemic when we were realizing worldwide that our clients needed additional support to be able to service their end clients. So one great example is what we call our healthcare MFP, which is for the healthcare industry. And that is a printer fax software combination that allows a provider, a healthcare provider, whether it's a tiny little office or a big hospital, to actually have the right interface in their medical record system. We have a tremendous amount of regulation around the world regarding privacy and security of patient information. So our offering for healthcare MFP actually automates the workflow in a very secure manner in terms of putting information that comes from a small doctor's office or a large hospital into the repository that's used, whether it's Epic or Cerner or whatever, is your hospital repository system or your healthcare repository system. And then our healthcare MFP helps the transaction back and forth between the hospital, the small office, and the clients. So that's one example that if you're in an office setting or in a hospital setting, it's quite easy to start that up because it integrates seamlessly into whatever your healthcare record management system is. The other thing is we have been developing with our partners a tremendous amount of apps that sit on our printers. Again, this is software that sits on the hardware that we say makes it sing, that automates a certain amount of processes. So if you always send, 10 copies on Monday morning to these 6 places, this would actually help you do the digitization of that and send it one click, then, whatever receipt you get back from that, the actual 5 or 6 steps that someone would normally take, we're able to digitize that and actually now do that remotely and send it to maybe a printer or an off-copy print center that's near your home versus in the office where you always handled it. So our focus is on this work anywhere environment, right? We know that you may be in the office a few days, and that's evolved around the world from no one was in the office, right, to now we have, many, many more people in the office, but not everyone. So we're very focused on how we can handle the workflow end to end wherever that employee is working in support of their end customer. So we have a variety of really cool apps that are based on this point of work anywhere, digitize the workflow as much as possible.
I guess, even though there's this, like you say, rapid acceleration to digital transformation over the past year, many SMBs are still reliant on print. So it sounds like Xerox has the solutions and services to support SMBs and their employees, however they want to work, whether it's predominantly print or digital, and you actually offer those workflow automation services. And I guess it depends on vertical markets as to how far they are on that digitization journey as well.
And Louella, I think there is a tremendous amount of you use the word disruption, right, when you started, which is, now it's so intertwined. Okay, I want hard copy of this. No, I want it all digitized. No, today I need hard copy. Tomorrow I won't be near a printer, right? So we have to be really apt in understanding that you may want both or one, and we have to be able to flawlessly execute to either digitized or the actual print.
Yeah, so it's all about integrating those workflows. And, the Quocirca research that we've just conducted shows that, I guess it's still uncertain times in terms of post-pandemic office print volumes recovery. But, in certain verticals, we do see that they are starting to bounce back. Like you say, there's many employees who are back in the office now. So, it's really opportunities there for companies like Xerox to really sort of help those companies support their hybrid workers. And you touched on sort of automation around RPA there, and it's really emerging as an opportunity for SMBs to further digitize their operations. How does RPA fit into Xerox's products and service offerings?
We're really excited about RPA. So as you know, Louella, RPA, robotic process automation, basically takes a series of steps that you traditionally do to do any task, and it automates them. So you have a team of developers that are actually coding what are those steps that you need to take to do your process. So that is RPA. And in Xerox, we actually started about 3 years ago on a journey to greatly improve our billing systems. Because Xerox is a 112-year-old company, those of you that are my age might have coded in COBOL or know what COBOL is, but it's the heartbeat of many billing systems. So we had migrated and had a variety of billing systems, whether we were in Europe or in Asia or in the US, and we had a big project to improve the client experience without what I call a heart and lung transplant. A heart and lung transplant would be, getting rid of the current billing systems and bringing a new one in. So we embarked on a very large project to use robotic process automation, which I talk about constant focus on improving the client experience. So we were looking at where there were breakpoints between the legacy systems and the newer systems, where there were manual processes, where quality errors happened, where maybe we didn't have the right response time to a client. And we put robotic process automation, I look at it as a net on top of all these billing systems around the world, so that we could improve the client experience in the end. We did not rip and replace the back-end systems. So it was quite frankly, quite cost efficient, but greatly improved the service we were giving to our end clients. Now, to do that very large piece of work, we have a large team of developers that are RPA experts, right? We have a great man here in Xerox, Steve Miller and his team, that have developed this, that work on a couple of different RPA platforms. And we decided that, oh my goodness, I was very involved in that initial work for billing. So I was like, oh my goodness, if we could use the same team and really have a menu of RPA that we could sell as part of our IT services to our small and medium business, this would be wonderful, because our SMBs don't have a big team of developers to go in, do an assessment, automate their processes. However, if you look at things like account payable, account receivable, some very straightforward administrative tasks, if we had a catalog that then we could use our developers to actually go in and look at their business, how we would take our accounts payable to adjust to what they were doing, we felt we could, for the first time, provide RPA for SMB at a great price point that could demonstrate ROI. So we started offering this towards the end of the first quarter of this year, and it's very, very well received by our clients. And we have examples, again, we just started selling this externally based on our own experience of clients in the legal industry who are cataloging all their artifacts and making sure that they can get the right artifact to the right participant, at what time. We're also doing a lot of accounts payable and accounts receivable automation, again, for small and medium business, that is taking the kernel of what we did here in Xerox and doing some level of customization. We're also doing things like routine clerical tasks, really interesting in a large clinic setting, multi-offices around the US, the scheduling of physical therapists and speech therapists, looking at where there's free space in the calendar, who needs a physical therapy appointment in Queens, in New York, there's somebody available. So that work that's quite tedious, that we've automated for our clients. So there's a raft of really interesting things that we're doing with automation. And it's part of our IT services offering, Louella.
Okay, now it's interesting because you mentioned COBOL there, and actually I've got a computer science background, so I do remember programming in COBOL at IBM as well, funnily enough. So yeah, so that brought back memories of that. Yeah, and I suppose that shift from that legacy infrastructure to the more sort of modern distributed environment is really important. But it's really interesting to hear your focus on RPA, because it sounds like you're making really strong inroads there, and I think generally the perception is RPA is really the exclusive domain of larger enterprises, but you're actually making that accessible to the SMB market.
Yes, it's great. I mean, we're also selling it to enterprise, but it is enterprise. If you think about very large firms, they generally have their own RPA team. If you're Fortune 100. Yes. Yeah. Whereas SMBs are like, oh my goodness, I didn't think this was in the realm of possibility for me. So
yeah, and I guess it's helping them again future-proof their markets, again future-proof their business, and build competitive advantage, which I think is really so important for SMBs to be able to compete on a level playing field with some of their larger counterparts. So in terms of digital transformation, I guess that you mentioned before that SMEs, it's such a broad and diverse market segment, and digital transformation can be a catch-all for many types of activities, and it can be a daunting task for some businesses. What advice would you give to SMBs who want to digitize and maybe aren't sure where to start? And are there some quick wins that can really help generate momentum around digitization?
I think the first thing is to get an assessment, get a company in that could look at your current processes to understand which are the ones that can be effectively automated or digitized. I think sometimes I've dealt with some clients that come in with a really strong point of view. I want to digitize this. And it's like, well, once you get into it with them, it's like, that's gonna be really hard and really expensive. However, let's look at how much energy you put into these other tasks. So this point of an assessment by a firm to come in and really look at all your processes. Obviously, if there's one that you're strident, you need to automate, or digitize, we would help with that. But I think the very first thing is to have people come in who can assess your different workflows. And then what we would do is work with that client to do that automation. So we had something that came up, and it was a result actually of a large university in California in the beginning of the pandemic, and this became a worldwide, this caught fire for us. We call it digital mail. And that is going in and basically digitizing all your incoming mail. But we couldn't stop there, because the reality was just digitizing it, they'd all be in folders and there was no one there to catch it. So we actually had to go back and look at what were the workflows that all that mail, or the preponderance of the mail, was coming in from. So we kind of backward engineered it into, oh my God, 9/10 of that is AR. Let's see who are the 10 people that touch that for this college. And we then digitized that workflow between the 10 employees who now are working at home, by the way, and they still needed some level of print. So we provided the software, we did the analytics and provided the associated software repository and, printers as well, to be able to do the level of support they needed, whether it was digitized workflow and or, hard copy. But it started with the customer problem. Digital mail for us is now a very, very big offering around the world, and the pandemic, drove that. But I think when I think about a client and where do they start, specifically in SMB, unless they really, have a really good understanding of RPA, they may not understand what can be easily done in RPA and most effective, and what can't. So I think an assessment is kind of the first way. And then, we would go from there. But there's lots of, if you think about every single process you do, of course, there's an ability to map those processes, to write code, to automate them. But the focus, and we found this with our clients, they are trying to make sure that they are improving their experience for their clients. So when you automate a process, you're improving the quality because you're making sure that you're doing it once right. And you're also, we build security into that workflow, obviously. And it allows the employees that they do have, right? Again, when we have such scarce talent and resources, we're facing this issue around the world. We're able to let the employees actually focus on more value-added activities.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Great Resignation, or sometimes known as the Great Reprioritization as well. And, the talent shortage and the way businesses really need to attract and retain talents now. And I guess many organizations, because of the skill shortage, are looking to managed IT services. So could you give a bit of insight into Xerox Managed IT Services offerings and some examples of companies you've worked with there?
Sure. The IT services offerings, we went public with it about 2 years ago in a big way. We were doing it in a small part of the US, and we realized it's a tremendous offering. And it was built on a couple of points. The first one is our teams, our small and medium business teams around the world. We're building them up in Europe right now, our small and medium business teams. We have a very large team here in the US, about 1,700 men and women in offices around the US, and we're building that out in Europe right now. But those people generally, it's that local touch point. And often, if you're dealing with an SMB, our salespeople, our great Xerox products, and our service, our clients actually were asking, can you help me with laptops? Can you do something about the router? And previously it was like, no, we really don't. And then it was like, oh my goodness, we're doing it with this one team. It was, it was gold. The clients were thrilled. And we decided to develop this offering again that we run worldwide. And it is basically for SMB. We're not doing it for large enterprise, again, because they generally have their own IT teams. So this is where we are either doing all the IT for a small firm or we're providing ancillary services. So our IT services basically does end to end. We would supply, we call them the endpoints, the laptops, whatever your iPad of choice, however you work. We would also be responsible for the network infrastructure and making sure that your employees that are at home, all that connectivity is great. We also work with the necessary software and digitization to run that office. We also have virtual CIOs who would go in and consult with you as a business owner and help you drive down your total cost of ownership, because you may have 5 or 6 vendors that you work with today in the space, and we would help figure out, where we're getting the best price point, how to make sure we have end-to-end the best environment for their end clients and their employees. And so much now around the world, we talk about the employee experience. It used to be just the client experience. Now the employee experience, there's a reckoning, right, for us to recognize it's critically important that your employees are, pleased with what they have to use, that it's most efficient for them and their productivity, that they can have hours on and off, right? Again, the pandemic pushed a lot of this ahead for us. So our IT services offering, again, this end-to-end support and provision of hardware and software has been a very important part of our strategy here in Xerox, and continue to be a very important part of our growth. We are very focused on all sectors within SMB. Schools are really interesting. I thought when we started that schools would not be a big part of what we do, but it's turned out to be a very large part, because the schools love the point that if something's broken, we can have one of our local team actually go there and swap out, because now every child pretty much is given a device. So when the child's device is not working and they can't work, kind of everything falls apart. So we have our local teams, again, around, in the US and building out in Europe, who are able to provision, but as well have that very close support. So our focus is on, we'll get you the right equipment. We'll also be there to make sure that it's up and operational, and very important, secure, right? So we're finding all the verticals, there's great interest and, a great level of, opportunity for us, but interesting schools, elementary schools, high schools, and universities. It's a big part of our business.
Yeah, you mentioned the virtual CIO, which I think is really interesting. So is that part of an exercise to understand the SMB's IT infrastructure and look at all elements like security, mobility, cloud, and so on? Because, I think we see that you mentioned security, that, large enterprises are more concerned, or certainly they are concerned about the hybrid work environment and the impact on security. But I'm just curious whether you're seeing that as a concern around SMBs as well.
It is. And Louella, I'm not sure if I mentioned it when we started, but the SMBs have been hit a lot harder than large enterprises related to what I say are the bad guys, because they have vulnerabilities and there's not enough expertise to be able to stop those. So, we're not going to find a database to show us how much ransom was paid, but they are, the bad guys are targeting SMBs big time. So, and we've found with our discussions with clients that is way up there. That and the fact of improving the client experience and being able to get where they can't get workers to be able to digitize, automate. But, IT services for us, again, this virtual CIO is, if you think about your company, Louella, right, there needs to be somebody that understands for Quocirca, the environment that you have for your employees and how you communicate with your external, parties and analysts, et cetera. So our virtual CIO goes into a business and tries to understand all about it, and then looks at what's the most cost-effective, secure environment that they could bring.
And I think what's really coming through in this conversation is the real need to focus on customer experience as well as employee experience. That's been such a big change since the pandemic, is that, I think the power has really shifted to the employees because, we talked about the great resignation and the talent shortage as well. And I think any technology that's implemented has to really support those two areas. It's kind of the workforce as well as the workplace. So I just wanted to shift a bit and discuss Xerox's, I guess, programs around the channel, because, obviously critical to success in the SMB space is, a solid channel program in terms of execution and offering. So what is Xerox doing to support its channel, deliver solutions and services to SMBs and help their customers improve their digitization initiatives?
Yeah, our channel is critically important to us here in Xerox, right? We have a large channel organization and a great set of, we call them agents here in the US, and my colleague Jack Edward would call them concessionaires in Europe. As well, we deal with multi-brand dealers. Our channel, we are so grateful for our channel partners. So everything that I talked about, we are making available to our channel partners. And we have the training that we do internally for our direct sales reps. We're providing that same training, communication, marketing collateral to our partners because it's critical. They can't have a successful business via Xerox if we're not providing that. So everything that I spoke about, we're making available to our partners. And one point I wanted to make, the app gallery that we have that supports our printers, right? It is it's an open app gallery, and we provide some remuneration, excuse me, I'm messing up that word, the payment for partners that have dreamt up apps and that says how it will meet their work problem. So sometimes we would work with a partner that we develop it. Sometimes they get an outside party to develop it, and then they get payment streams as a result of the app. But it's just like the Apple Store, the App Store, where there's, it's an open environment. And we found there's been just some great apps that our partners have developed around the world based on their business circumstances and their end clients. So I think that's part of the vibrancy of our innovation, is clearly what our channel partners are saying they need for their clients.
Yes, because the channel has to adapt as much as any other business today. And I think, Xerox has always been, in Quocirca's view, ahead in terms of its ecosystem around this apps and software solutions. And I think it's got some really sort of strong channel offerings to help the channel partners customize applications for their customers. So I think it's really interesting to hear that's continuing and expanding across the world. And, I think that innovation is really what's needed in the channel to help them really move away from the hardware to the software service-centric model.
Exactly.
So just you sort of mentioned innovation there, and I think we've heard recently that Xerox has made some changes in terms of its stock market listing from the New York Stock Exchange to NASDAQ, and I think that's very much focused on its R&D expertise with Park and shifting its innovation commitments. So could you talk a bit about the rationale behind that, because we do believe that OEMs have to constantly innovate, not just around technology, but business models and even the company culture. So yeah, just curious as to what the plans are there.
We're really excited about our innovation agenda. And, when you think of Xerox, right, it's over 100 years old, but we started on a groundbreaking technology innovation, right? If you think about Xerox. And we want to make sure that we continue that focus on innovation because, Louella, I completely agree. If you don't innovate, you'll be left in the dust, right? So it is incredibly important for us. So we have our Park unit, which is out in Palo Alto Research Center in California. And it's a community of innovation centers. What are the innovations that we could effectively provide that I'm going to use the word commercialize in the near future? This is not sandbox stuff. This is not brilliant scientists in the lab that are not creating things that we can commercialize and that are going to be valuable for the world. We are very focused and have narrowed down the things that we're working on in our Palo Alto Research Center and associated labs. Because if you do too many things, you're not going to get anything accomplished, right? So there's some areas that we are, have a tremendous amount of focus on and the goal is how we can get product to market that's going to change the world, right? Just like we did over 100 years ago. So some really interesting things. One is Care AR, Louella. I'm not sure if Mike talked about it when he spoke with you previously. But that's evolved tremendously over the last several months. And that is, it's basically a service, an automated service environment with virtual reality. So if you take Xerox, and we're using it here in Xerox, our techs, so for example, you could have a production printer that's down, which is a very bad thing if you're a production print house, right? And it's Xerox equipment. And maybe the tech can't get there because it's in a very remote place and we need to get it operational right away. We would use Care AR to do remote assistance where we could have the client and or a tech that may not know that production equipment actually get on the machine and to be taken through it with if you think about virtual reality goggles, you don't have the goggles, but you have it on your phone or your iPad. We have the associated virtual reality technology to be able to step through the 10 or the 12 or the 40 steps to actually get that production gear back up and operational. So it's a very sophisticated, service engineering support model that we have. We acquired a company called Care AR and now have integrated into the way we are providing service. And it's actively, we're actively selling that to other companies right now. So that we're really excited about. Another one is 3D, where it's kind of back to our roots when you think about additive and toners, right? What we started doing with Xerox, putting, print on paper. So if you think about it, it is where we could have a 3D device where we are providing spare parts for critical industrial, environments. And we're actually in a project right now with the US Navy doing this. So there is some really interesting technology, and we're using aluminum wire actually for the additive technology, which is very different than anybody else's because that's a cheaper additive to use. So our focus is on how we make great products, again, that are going to change the world, right? That we are going to see Xerox, not just be known for print, but be known for a lot more.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you sort of talk about, it's over 100 years old in terms of the company, and at that early stage it was a breakthrough in terms of the copier, and it's really interesting to hear that Xerox is still really committed and focused on innovation. So I look forward to hearing more about its progress in 3D printing, care AR, and also IoT. Actually, can you talk a bit about the IoT initiatives as well?
Thank you. I didn't want to be taking up too much of your time, Louella, but another one I'd like to talk about is Eloque. So we are in a joint arrangement with the Victorian government, Melbourne, Australia. And we have we have a company now called Eloque. It's this joint partnership where we are on all the bridges in Victoria. We are putting sensors on the bridges, and this will check traffic, obviously, but more importantly, what's happening to the firmament of those bridges. Is there stress points? Is there water damage? And feeding that back into a repository, for the Victorian government to look at, oh my goodness, we need to get out here. It looks like the cement is shifting on this one bridge. So using IoT, again, we're so focused on commercial reality and how we can make this work out in the world rather than in the basement of a lab, right? So that IoT example, right, is already in place in Victoria. And again, we're looking at expanding it. We're also doing some really interesting things with, again, the US government. We call it Ocean of Things, sensor technology related to the oceans, and doing analytics on parts of the ocean. I mean, the ocean we know is, 80% of our world is ocean and water, right? So there is a tremendous amount of unknowns related to ocean. So we are working with the government using our sensor technology to gain more information, to understand what global warming is doing to us, where there's more pollution in one section than another. So really interesting, important projects for the improvement of the world.
Yeah, and I think with that, the increased focus on, climate today, it's really interesting to hear Xerox's initiatives around clean tech and, like you say, IoT, 3D printing and so on. So, yeah, I'll definitely watch this space to learn more. It's been really interesting to hear, what Xerox is doing, particularly in the SMB space. But just in terms of the wider market, do you have any predictions or trends that you think will be key going forwards in 2022 or beyond?
I think RPA, Louella, again, has been, for the very, I'm going to say elite, right? The big firm. And I just see that becoming democratized, right? That every firm, however small, will be able to use RPA to improve their business, right? And to allow their employees to do more value-added tasks rather than rote tasks, right? So RPA is going to help with quality, but it will also help with security of those processes as well.
Yeah, that's a great prediction. And I think it really sums up what we've been discussing about how automation is not the exclusive domain of larger enterprises and is becoming accessible to SMBs. And, I guess ultimately it will be the digital SMB that will be best positioned to be resilient and adapt quickly to change. It's all about, as we said, future-proofing their business. So, I really want to thank you again for joining me today. It's been really great and an in-depth, conversation to find out what Xerox is doing in the SMB space, but also its plans around R&D and innovation. So, yeah, really appreciate your time, and thanks again for joining me, Joanne.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So thank you for joining today's In the Spotlight with Quocirca episode. For more information, please go to quocirca.com and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.